when you have compassion, you cannot have poverty. You cannot have inequality. You cannot have prejudice, because we see one another through universal human needs, and therefore we kind of go back to our original organic relationship.
Welcome to the Mindful Communication Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Miller. And on today's episode, we interview Thom Bond. He's the founder and director of the New York Center for Nonviolent Communication. He's also the author of the Compassion book and is the creator and leader of the Compassion course, a comprehensive online training that has over 19,000 participants from over 110 countries in 4 languages. Thom is a veteran in the professional development industry with over 30 years of experience. We cover the basics of nonviolent communication and really take a deep dive into what it is and how it can be used in our daily life. We also talk about why it is such a powerful methodology for conflict resolution. It was tons of fun to talk to Thom. He's really one of those people who are truly a visionary and who have these grand, large ideas of how they want to change the world. And the coolest thing is that he's actually doing it. One of my biggest takeaways here was getting present to the fact that not only is nonviolent communication a way of communicating, a way of speaking, but it's actually a way of thinking as well. It is truly a great example of how when we take a more conscious look at our words, when we are more careful about how we speak and how we listen, that translates into direct mindset changes, direct changes in our perspective and how we're perceiving life. You can also expect this episode to be chock full of bits of wisdom, so make sure to stay tuned and pay close attention for those nuggets. We start off the interview by finding out a little bit more about Thom and what he's doing over at NYC NVC. Thom Bond, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
So I wanted to start off giving our listeners a better idea of who you are, and particularly who you are in relation to nonviolent communication, or NVC as we'll refer to it moving forward, at least I will. So how is it that you got into NVC?
It was basically from being introduced through his book, Marshall Rosenberg's book. I was in a relationship, we were having difficulty, and my partner at the time, I think she just sent me the first, or there was a way you could look at the first chapter or 2 online, and as soon as I finished reading it, I was just blown away. What he had done, Marshall Rosenberg had done in this book, was he had distilled, he presented it as a model, but what he did was create an outline for understanding almost all human conflict. And so even though I went to it specifically for this relationship, it really spoke to me on a much deeper level.
Wow, you're called to it.
Yeah. And it wasn't that different from what I was doing in terms of how I see myself on this planet, right? I was originally I was doing this as an engineer and making the entire planet better. When you save energy, you just do a lot of things. And in fact, energy is very, very much involved in the entire system of human existence.
Yeah.
Energy itself is why we're where we're at today. Jets, cars, all that. And so if you can affect energy, you're affecting everything. And that's always been my approach. How can I get the most effect from what I do? And so originally it was by saving energy. I accomplished a lot of things. But then when I ran into this, I saw another opportunity. And that is what Marshall had figured out, was his discovery was that if we pay attention to our universal human needs, as he defined, and we really do need to be careful about that. I think we redefined a few things, or he redefined a few things. But ultimately, if we pay attention to our universal human needs, our own and each other's, it changes everything. Because what it does is it brings us to a more compassionate state. And in fact, that's one of the words I think we are in the process of redefining. Compassion. You know, if you look it up in the dictionary, it's pity.
Pity.
Pity. And pity comes from a differential, like a power differential.
It seems like there's a negative connotation to that almost.
Yeah. Well, what's ingrained in that is that I can pity you. It's, in other words, that the relationship is such that it's pity as opposed to care, or this organic caring, or what I call organic compassion or natural compassion, which is different. It's not I feel sorry for you. It's that your needs matter to me. And in fact, that's what brought us humans together, and why we're doing so well here on the planet, is our ability to do that. And so this, what Marshall discovered is how we can really supercharge our compassion, our ability to see one another. And it's really challenging right now because we're isolated from one another so much, from language, and we don't see one another. We don't see what's happening in other places in the world. So it's very hard for us, even if we may know on some level that things are happening. It's difficult for us to really connect to that. And so what Marshall did was he figured out a way for us humans to connect to one another and, to go back systemically. When you have compassion, you cannot have poverty. You cannot have inequality. You cannot have prejudice, because we see one another through universal human needs, and therefore we kind of go back to our original organic relationship, which is we care about each other naturally, not because we should or shouldn't. It's not something you turn on and off. However, it is something that's been difficult for us. And so, so I flipped the switch, so to speak, around 2002 after I met Marshall Rosenberg. So I've adopted nonviolent communication. It's more than nonviolent communication. It's progressed beyond that now to there being an understanding of the entire experience of it, not just saying words, but being connected to our universal human needs.
Let's quickly, just for our listeners, to make sure that they're fully on the same page as us, if we could find a compact way to describe what exactly is NVC, like what is it?
Sure. If you look it up right now, it's considered a language model.
Okay.
Which consists of four parts, and if you speak this way, it will help you get through conflicts. And that's what Marshall taught. That was his claim to fame. Everybody loves 4 steps. Everybody loves steps. Everybody wants to be able to cure all of our ills with 4 steps. Come on, who couldn't resist that, or who could resist that rather? So, so he became famous with this thing called nonviolent communication, which had a catchy name that he particularly did not like, really, but was stuck with it. That was one of our debates, the whole non and violent, and the real meaning of these words and how we were using them, and how that actually matched or didn't match the work itself. So
that's the kind of gist of it. It's 4 steps to conflict resolution.
And he hit the big time, in his book. It was sold over 1 million copies now. And the thing that and there are folks out there who were able, what happened was people learned this, and this was one of the big discussions with Marshall. People learned this model, but didn't go through the transformation or the shift in perspective that the model was designed to represent. And so what was it a model of? Was it a model of how to speak, or was it a model of how to think? And I see it as a model of how to think, not just talk, because you could force the words, but thinking is different. Thinking is an invitation to perspective. And that's what he showed. It was this way for us to, again, naturally experience compassion, not do it because you're supposed to be doing a model, or not even doing it because you think you're supposed to or you should. Just doing it out of a natural thing that we humans experience when we become aware of certain things. So you could call it the consciousness or NVC consciousness, which was a lot of the discussion. And so for Marshall, it was a real mixed bag, because here he was having all this fame, and at the same time, he was experiencing this kind of deep frustration and pain, because he was hoping to see people going past that model and moving into the consciousness, which there are people out there who have done that, of course. And so that was, I saw that also as part of what I think was really important about teaching this, that if you teach the model, you run the risk of you could almost like say counterfeiting the speech. And so what I concentrate on is, what's the consciousness? Where do I want to bring my awareness? Not say these 4 things. Where do I want to bring my awareness? Why? How? What happens there? And to bring it into an experience, not a model. And so and this was a big challenge, because how do you do that? So I think it was 2005, when Rita Herzog, who really had such crystal clarity about the consciousness versus the model, challenged me to teach without writing the model out anywhere. And so it forced me to really go there. And I put my trainer hat on and came up with this approach to look at what the model was based on without looking at the model. And what it's based on, to be clear, is this discovery, you could say, that when we become aware, and really aware and connect to one another's needs, universal human needs. And I'm not talking about cars and houses, and I'm talking about our needs for creativity and love, and for survival needs as well. So the work really, basically the model that Marshall had invented, was showing us this map, you could say, of how to go. And so now what we do at NYC is we really focus on, and what I discovered from Rita's challenge was, it's really all about becoming aware of this life energy that we are experiencing and that other people are experiencing. And how do you do that? Well, you have to see it, you have to articulate it, you have to have some way to do that. And then so that you can communicate. And so that's what we do. You kind of go through these phases, you could say, to become aware that needs even exist. And what are we talking about when we say that? And then to act based on that, or more, for most of us, it has to do with creating a relationship to our needs. I was taught that needs were a bad idea, that needs were not cool, that you were selfish, or it was self-indulgent, or needy. That there was, a lot of, you don't want to have needs. I was taught, don't you go having any needs. But this is different. And this is really looking at needs that you couldn't get rid of if you tried, which really boils down to, I'm going to use those words, life energy again. And it is what, if you look at the list of needs words that we use a lot, you'll see that every one of them represents an impulse or an energy of life, not a thing. Not a car, not even a relationship. It's an impulse of life. And so that's the kind of was the next step. And that's what Marshall is trying to introduce people to, the impulses of life. And so we do it a little differently. And that is, again, by first getting clear on what this is, what needs are, and what are we talking about when we say that. And then being able to, so to be able to, I call it the parallel universe, right? Be able to see the parallel universe of needs, and then talk it, speak it, say, this is what my experience is, to share that, and to be able to see that experience in others. Because we all have them, and that was the key. It was the universal thing. You cannot find me a human being on this planet that doesn't have the exact same set of needs that you and I have, or that anybody who's listening to this has. Now, how they're met, what our experiences, of course, they're very different. But they're there, the impulses, when we look at the impulses of life, they're universal. And so that's what turned me on about this. Talking about going back to talking about how energy is universal. Well, needs are universal. And so that got my attention.
You are listening to the Mindful Communication Podcast, and today we're sitting down with Thom Bond, the founder and director of education for the New York Center for Nonviolent Communication. This conflict resolution language, nonviolent communication, really touches to the core of what it means to be a human being. When we're talking at the level of universal human needs, it has become such a powerful conversation. We're not talking about others in ways in which they're wrong. We're talking about our own needs. We're talking about our own needs that are intrinsic and intangible and that are so important to us and at the same time connect us to every other human on Earth. There's so much power and potency in that. And when we have that awareness of our interconnectedness, we can bring about these amazing qualities of compassion, of harmony, of empathy, and we can go forward and continue to act and think in a way that fosters that compassion, that connection, and that empathy. In the next half of this interview, I start off by getting specific, by getting an actual example of how this looks in our day-to-day life. I want to put you on the spot real quick and just really put some context to this. And I was wondering if you could help out with an example of how it would look like to respond in day-to-day life with just how I would normally respond versus a response in terms of needs specifically. Like, how would that look like in life that would make it seem like kind of natural? And I know you talk a lot about like life energy. Like, I wouldn't necessarily bring up life energy in like contact, in like, a conversation.
Right. I get it. Right. How do we bring this into real life?
Yeah.
Which, by the way, thank you. That was another thing that I really like to think about. How do I say this naturally? Well, if I have a certain awareness, whatever comes out of my mouth is practice. If I'm connected to that. So yeah, give me an example. Do you have something or?
Sure. So say I'm at home and I'm feeling pretty frustrated because I'm really running late and I was waiting for the car to get home and I want to let my partner know, like, hey, I'm pretty PO'd that, the car's still not home, and like now I'm running late.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what maybe I would say to her in this situation, like, well, I'm pretty PO'd and now I'm running late. And she would say sorry, and then we would kind of go on our ways. Maybe that's how we would communicate in a non-conscious way.
Yeah. So that's a perfect disconnection with a disconnection return, in a way, you could say. Because why are you telling that person that? Is it so they go, oh, I'm so sorry, honey. I will never do that again. What are we looking for here?
I guess it's like my weird attempt to feel better myself.
Right.
Right.
So is that her job or is that your job? Well, let's not even figure out whose job it is. Let's just figure out, is there something I could do about this? If I had a choice and I didn't want to be pissed off, let's say I had a choice to not be pissed off, a way to see this so that I wasn't pissed off, or that I was pissed off less, or that somehow being pissed off was manageable for me. That's kind of what I would like to do. So the very first thing is to notice how I am. And whenever I'm angry, and I love this because we're really talking about two of the very important parts of the work that we do. There are two things happening. One is that I have an unmet need, right? Was it for choice? Was it so let's just get to know me. Who's here? And so what are my unmet needs? Because I know I have unmet needs because I'm pissed off. I can feel it in my bones, right?
Oh, yeah.
I can recognize it in my thoughts, words like inconsiderate or popping into my head, or, so there are all these signs, right? All these signs that I have an unmet need. And so I have a choice. I can, in this moment now, I can say, wow, do I want to, what is that? Can I go pay attention? Do I want to pay attention to that? Or would I rather just make this other person wrong and be pissed off? So if I had that choice, which we don't always, but this is part of the work, we can develop the choice, go, oh, wow, what is that? Well, I'm noticing I'm anxious right now because I'd love having a choice. And I'm not really feeling the partnership thing right now. And I would love to have that. So I want the partnership thing because I want some choice. So the first thing I want to look at is there something that I can do to remedy this, which a lot of times I would not, because I'd be so busy being upset with the other person that I might not stop and think, how could I meet my needs? But instead, we kind of get in this entanglement thing. And so, right, so that's the first part, is saying, okay, what are my needs here? Why am I? And then the next part is, and this is the second part of the two important things, is what are my thoughts here? Where am I headed? What am I aware of right now? And so if I'm aware that somebody should be doing something, that's very different than being aware of my own frustration about the circumstances that I'm in. And so I haven't found that sharing my anger with somebody is a connecting experience. It's a disconnecting experience. So if I want to be in a relationship with that person, it's probably not a good idea to make anger my entree to that conversation, right? So what this work does is it gives me the chance to internally figure out what is really important. What do I want in this moment? And so is there a way that I can address my unmet needs without it being a disconnecting experience, with it being okay that I had unmet needs, but important that they be addressed? So that's what this work does. It strips away, it gives us an opportunity to, which is the second part, to translate my judgments. So if I'm thinking my partner is inconsiderate, what do I want? There's information here. No matter what that judgment is, by the way, no matter what it is, there is some need connected to it. Are they lazy? So is somebody lazy? What do I need when I'm thinking somebody's lazy? Support, understanding, ease. What do I need when I'm thinking somebody's inconsiderate? Consideration.
Consideration, yeah.
Yeah, how about that? Yeah, and care maybe.
Yeah.
Right. So what we can do is start to look at, so imagine this. Imagine that we could say to our partner when they get home, two different things. The first one is let's say my unprocessed self, right? And when I say, honey, look, I really want to have a conversation with you about how inconsiderate you've been. There's the first one, and I'm really angry, and I just want you to know. And then the second one would be something like, oh, I'd love to share something with you. I am just going through so much right now. Oh my God, I'm really on edge right now because I'm just so anxious. I really wanting to have some sense of, I'm just anxious because I want to do what I want to do. It's like I went through this whole experience of just being stuck here in a way. And I really want to pay attention to that. Now, if I get to that place in my mind before my partner gets home, but I've got this kind of understanding that this is what I want. And I also want to keep a connection with my partner. I don't want every time something goes wrong for this to be a source of disconnection. And so one of the things that we learn is when I realize this, then probably the last thing I would ever do would be to have a conversation with this person while I was angry. Because I want that connection. And I know that I don't get it when I'm angry. It just doesn't happen. We all know this. And so there's this idea of what we talked about just now of self-empathizing and understanding not just what do I want this other person to do, but what do I want the experience of my life to be in the next hour? And so this gives us a choice to get through conflicts where, by the way, so one of the things that I learned was this idea of striking when the iron is cold. Why would I if I really want to have connection with this person, what I come to is that, wow, I would never have a conversation with you when I was angry. So I might get quiet. That I might do.
Oh, yeah.
But that's different than like a punitive silence. It would be more of a protective silence. And I might say something like, I am really kind of wigged out right now, in no condition to have a conversation. But what I do want to do when I'm not so wigged out is I'd love to talk about this when we're both kind of chill. And I'd love to work this out. You could get to that instead of talking about how you're inconsiderate.
I mean, I'm seeing obviously, and since I've been studying and practicing NVC, I see that huge shift in just the ways that you can respond so much more openly, compassionately, clearly, authentically.
Yeah.
And I'm glad we talked about that example as well. And your answer, I mean, something that popped into my head was wow, this is pretty complicated actually at times. And I know that when I first started getting into NVC, I was a little overwhelmed. Wow, this is a lot to remember all at the same time. And what I just try to remind myself is that, this is a practice. It's a practice. That's why assessors and people like you have been practicing for years doing this. So it's not something you kind of rush into.
No. However, I want to say, even though from the outside it looks complicated, it's complicated like a mogul field on a ski slope is complicated, right? If you had to actually think out how you were going to get to the bottom of that thing, you'd never be able to do it. And if you looked at how somebody went down afterwards, looked at their trail, you go, I could never figure that out, because you can't, right? The way we get down a mogul hill is we get to a certain place and we stop, so to speak. Anybody who's ever skied down a mogul field knows you don't really stop. But what you do is you look from this new perspective and say, where do I go now?
Mm-hmm.
And then you look at the next perspective and you say, where do I go now? So from the outside, yeah, it looks really complicated, but I'm really only looking at the next moment. So it's not complicated. I'm actually being guided by life energy. If I do it, you know, if I'm doing it really in the consciousness, I'm really not, I'm just following the life energy as opposed to disconnecting from it with my thoughts.
I want to talk about NYC, NVC a little bit more, and actually NVC as a whole. I know that NVC has gained tremendous popularity over, the years.
Yeah.
And I want to know where you see NVC going next. I mean, it's becoming more and more popular. I see it as a great interpersonal skill. What is its evolution? Like, where is it going next? Like, how do we get NVC in, like, everywhere around the world and everyone aware of it?
Yeah. Well, the thing about this work is, one of the things about it is that you're studying it and you've said yourself it's kind of challenging, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you want to learn this, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
How difficult would you find this if you didn't want to learn it?
I would definitely find it much more difficult.
Like impossible, maybe.
Yeah, quite around that area, yeah.
Yeah, right. And so one of the things that I think is important is to teach this to folks who want to learn it. Because whenever you teach it to people who don't want to learn it, number one, you're not really paying attention to their needs, so you're not even acting in accordance with your practice in a way. And number two, you're going to be a very bad teacher because you could never win, right? You could never learn, you could never teach this. So the reason I'm even talking about this is because I think there are places and there are people who are ready to learn this and want to learn this and therefore can learn this, and therefore that's where I want to pay attention. But in a way, the first criteria is that you have to want to learn it. So that makes teaching this or kind of sharing it around the planet different. It gives us in a way a different footprint, because you can't go teaching it in all the schools unless suddenly everybody in all the schools wants to learn it.
Right.
So how do you teach something like that? Well, you find the people who want to learn it. So that's part of how NYC NVC has, I think, grown, is that people who are in our workshops, every one of them, it's one of the criteria of being in one of our workshops. You have to want to be there. So you can't sign somebody else up for one of our workshops, for example. You can't, force your crew to go to one of our workshops. Every single person has to say, yes, I want this. And has to want it, not just say it, because that contributes to the direction, the potence, if you will, of our training.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first part, is to find those people. And part of it is our registration process. And then, so that's kind of a self-managing thing. Yeah. So the other thing is that we need to have access for people. That was another big thing for me. If we were only going to teach this to people who had money or education even, then it was not going to work very well. So let's put those two things together. People who want to learn this, and then let's break the barriers of money. Otherwise, you're going to just be not addressing the world. You're addressing just parts of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was part of our methodology and part of the compassion course, where there is absolutely nobody who's ever will be refused access to this course because of money. And it's not just a little course. It's a super comprehensive course. It's the course that trainers are asked to take before they become certified in the certified world. And so that was an important piece for me to get this out there. So that way, and I am so, I can't say how grateful I am to be alive in 2019 when we have an internet as widespread as it is. And it goes through the airways too. And so in Africa, in Syria, in Yemen, in Saudi Arabia, all these places, Brooklyn, we're all connected. Ontario, you name it, we're all connected for the first time in our history. Mm-hmm. Like history. And so part of this is to really take advantage of that, which works for me. I'm kind of a techie guy. And so part of this was get it out there. The next barrier for us was language. And I'm kind of language challenged myself. And so I didn't know what I was going to do about that. And as it turns out, that is naturally just being taken care of. I think we're at 11 languages now where volunteers have contacted me, and I'm working with people to get it done. So we're translating the course. So we're getting around the language barriers. So here we are, we're getting around language barriers, we're getting around communication barriers for the first time in history. And what are we doing? We're teaching compassion. So ultimately, if this all goes according to plan, it will have a global effect. Now, how do you get there? How do you move, how do you make that network? So first of all, there's the internet, which gives us the general population of the world. Now, other places where I've experienced a real desire from people to learn this is clergy. The acceptance among clergy of the work in the course and the book is universal. We haven't run into we haven't run into any religious conflicts with this work. So, again, talking about universality and being systemic, that was a really important aspect here. Because if one religion says, yeah, this is fine, and another religion says no good, what do you do?
It doesn't work.
Right. But this has been universally accepted. You name it. There is no part of the world at this point where there isn't somebody taking this course.
Two things. You mentioned the compassion course. You also mentioned your book. Could you quickly just highlight briefly just what those two things are and what's entailed in both those things?
Yes. The course is been offered for 8 years. It's simply an online offering that you get every week. You get a message and there's exercises, there's stories, there's concepts, and it just walks you through the process from the very beginning, from day one. You could wander, quote, virtually wander in off the street, and you'd be able to pick it up and take it all the way to a pretty darned integrated advanced level. And it's a very challenging course. And a lot of folks do it for years after year after year. And just kind of do it as a practice. And what I loved about it was, and still do love about it, and I'll go back to what I was saying before, is you will never be turned away because you don't have money. Never, ever, ever. It's free. So and when you register for the course, you decide your level of scholarship. And you can also donate for somebody else if you want to. And so there's an ecology there that's completely consistent with the work that we're teaching. Otherwise, you're actually teaching people to not integrate it. Yeah, it's a nice idea, but we don't really do it.
Yeah.
Right. And so we're really doing it to the best we can, obviously, in the context that we're in. So the course carries you, like I said, into a pretty advanced mode. If you're in the course, so it's you know what I'm talking about. And there's a community, and that's what I love about it. It's alive. Now, there's a book also for those that has the same content in it, but it's not a community. It's a book, which, depending on what you like, it's there. And so, but what the course has is different message boards and a private Facebook page, and you can interact and get a lot of support from the community, and it keeps it as a moving, living thing. And that happens once a year, by the way, only once a year, first Wednesday of summer here in the north side of the world. And then it goes for an entire year. So the week one ends, the next one starts.
As we're coming to the end of this interview, one question I had is this big question of why. Why are you doing these things that you are doing to make the biggest impact? Why is that important to you?
Because I'm selfish. I have this thing that I noticed that when I contribute to people, it gives me this tremendous sense of purpose and meaning. And so when I do things like this, I never sit around and wonder if my life has any meaning. And I don't have to worry about that. And so, yes, I have to worry about what I do, but I like that. So I do it because it makes me feel wonderful. It gives me a sense of purpose and meaning. And, in just a couple of words, really. And it comes from an ideal that I learned when I was a kid, and that is, I was taught to leave the place a little bit. When I was camping in particular, whenever we went camping, we wanted to make sure that we left the place in as good a shape, if not better shape. Like if you found somebody's old aluminum foil wrapper, you pick it up, and even then, I was told to do it, yes, but I remember the sensation of contributing that way. It felt great. It's like, yeah, I just made this, I just beautified this. I am in alignment with beauty right now. I mean, I didn't think those words, but I had an experience of it. And so contributing, leaving the place better than you found it, feels good to us humans, at least to this human. I'll just put it that way.
What is one piece of advice that you'd love to impart our listeners with?
Oh, don't ever give people advice that they're not asking for. So that's my way of not answering you, by the way.
I think that that's also a powerful piece of advice. Absolutely. So important. At least I do. I know I love giving advice. It's like an automatic reaction. So
yeah,
I like that. Thom, I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for all the work that you're doing with NYC NVC. I'm really looking forward to seeing how the organization grows and contributes more to the world. So thank you for being you and all the work that you're doing.
Great. Thanks, Jonathan. This is cool. This is fun. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Big thanks to Thom Bond for giving us his precious time. If you enjoyed today's episode, there are a number of ways you can support the podcast. You can subscribe, give it a great rating. Also share it on your social media channels. Get the word out about how important connection and communication is in our lives. You can also find us on Facebook at Mindful Comms and on Instagram at Mindful Communication. You can also go to mindfulcommunication.me and see what programs we are offering there. Music for the show was produced by Shinogo. You can check out Shinogo's music on SoundCloud, Spotify, iTunes, and Google Play. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Jonathan Miller, and you've been listening to the Mindful Communication Podcast.